they would say, when Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus, we have some authors saying Jews are guilty of deicide. Jews have killed God, and God held them responsible. What's a scribe who thinks that going to do with his prayer of forgiveness? He's going to take it out, and that's exactly what happens. Some of our early manuscripts are missing the prayer. They're missing it because scribes have changed it for reasons of their own. These are some of the big differences that you can find in the New Testament manuscripts, and there are all sorts of differences that you find. Some are related to theological disputes of early Christianity, where scribes have changed the text to make it coincide more closely with their own theological views. Some of these changes have to do with relationships of Christians and Jews. Some of these changes have to do with Christian understandings of women. There continue to be debates today in churches, Christian churches, about whether women should have leadership roles. Well, these debates often hinge on verses that have been changed by scribes. You can guess which way scribes changed these verses. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, when women's roles were being suppressed, all of a sudden manuscripts start showing up in which women are told to be silent in the churches. This is the sort of change that scribes made. The textual critic is somebody who tries to deal with this phenomenon of manuscripts that have so many changes in them. There are actually two things that a textual critic does. One thing that is, of course, primary importance is to figure out what an author actually wrote. Because you can't interpret an author, whether you're talking about Plato or Aristophanes or Homer or Mark or Matthew or Luke or John. You can't interpret what an author said unless you can't interpret what he said unless you know what he said. You've got to have his words, and so textual critics try to reconstruct to the best of their ability what an author actually wrote. A textual critic also, though, is interested in knowing why the text got changed. Why did scribes change the text? I mean, it's interesting to see that sometimes they fell asleep, but beyond that, what kind of theological motivations were there for changing the text? What kind of ideological influence were affecting these scribes? When we know more of that kind of information, we're better able to understand both the scribes and their own historical context as people living in the early centuries, especially the early centuries, a time period about which we have very little information about Christianity otherwise. Thank you very much. There are microphones on both sides, and I think we'll alternate. And can I just say that I will, if it doesn't sound like the question was loud enough, I'll repeat the question to make sure everybody heard it. So yes, start over here.
Yes. Early in your conversation or in your presentation, you mentioned that the Bible is often used in social situations, and you mentioned in particularly abortion, war, and what was the other one? Gay rights. Have any of the differences that you have found or others have found affected how those concepts would be interpreted?
Did you all hear that? Yeah. The kinds of social issues that are pressing for us today were not pressing to the scribes who were copying the texts. They simply had a whole different range of issues that they were far more concerned about. And so the passages that people leap on today to try and resolve certain kinds of issues simply didn't have that kind of importance to most of the scribes. So the answer is no. Most of those passages weren't affected. Yes?
Are you familiar with the book of Urantia?
Every time I give a talk, I have people ask me to read it, but I have not yet done so.
Well, it's an interesting read because often there's an expanded text on, might be one line in the New Testament, and in Urantia there might be 3 paragraphs. So
Yes.
I commend it to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Your comments on 2 other books, one of them the Gospel of Judas and the other the Sword of Christian, Constantine. Also, I'm an ERHMAN.
Really? How do you spell it?
EHRMAN.
Oh, okay. Go for it. Yeah, okay, he's asking about 2 of the books, the Gospel of Judas Iscariot. Yeah, actually, let me tell a story about the Gospel, because I was, when National Geographic was considering whether to finance the publication and dissemination of the Gospel of Judas, they called me and asked me if I would help them authenticate the manuscript, which was my first indication that National Geographic absolutely had no clue what they were doing with this manuscript, because it's written in Coptic, which I can read Coptic, but I'm not a Coptic scholar, right? And so I told the woman who had called me, I said, well, look, you need a Coptologist to do this. She said, oh yeah, great, okay, what's a Coptologist? A Coptologist is an expert in Coptic language who can, and she said, well, what we really want to do is date this manuscript. And I said, oh, well, to date the manuscript, then you need to get a paleographer. She said, oh, okay, great, yeah. No. What's a paleographer? Yeah. So then she said, well, really what we really want to do is carbon-14 date the manuscript. Are you able to help us with the carbon-14 dating? So yeah, right. Every Friday night, I carbon-14 date manuscripts. So, no, I can't help you with carbon-14 dating. You need a scientist for that. I said, look, I'll find you a Coptic paleographer, and you find a scientist who can carbon-14. And they said, well, we want you to be involved with this, though, because we want somebody who's interested in early Christianity and knows about Gospels that didn't make it in. I said, no, I'm happy to be involved. I said, but where's the manuscript? She said, well, it's in Geneva. I said, okay, count me in. And so we went to Geneva. I have a friend, a guy named Stephen Emmel, teaches in Germany, who's a Coptic paleographer, and called him up. And I said, Stephen, I don't know if you've heard these rumors, but the Gospel of Judas has turned up. And Emmel says, yeah. He says, you know what? I think I saw it 20 years ago. I said, oh my God, you want to see it again? He said, yeah. I said, okay, let's go to Geneva. And so we did. So the Gospel of Judas is it's the most recent discovery of an early Christian text. It was actually discovered 30 years ago now, 1978. But it's a very long story. It was unknown basically to everybody until just 3 or 4 years ago, when it finally got into the hands of competent scholars and conservationists who could put it back together, because it was fragmented in 1,000 pieces. But it's a very interesting gospel because it's a gospel that is a Gnostic gospel that talks about how this world we live in is not the creation of the one true God, but is a creation of lower, inferior divinities. And the point of salvation is to escape this world. Okay, if you all know Gnosticism, I'm sorry, I'm taking a little longer on this than I should, but if you know the world of Gnosticism, the Gnostic Gospels, Gnostic Christians were people who felt like they were entrapped in their bodies in this world, that they were imprisoned in bodies, and that because the creator of this world wasn't the one true God, it was a lower divinity. So the way I illustrate this with my students is, how sometimes people feel like they're alienated in this world, like they look around, they just don't feel like they belong here. They look around and this world just doesn't make sense to them. I felt this way till the last election, actually. I knew people that seemed to do just fine, but it didn't make sense to me. I realized I don't belong here. I'm from another world, and these friends of mine are not from another world. They belong here. And so these Gnostics thought that they need to escape this world by having secret knowledge, and these Gnostic Gospels are Gospels that provide the secret knowledge. So the Gospel of Judas is that kind of thing. The most important discovery of a Christian book in the last 60 years, in my opinion. The other question was about the Sword of Constantine, written by James Carroll, which is, I think, a terrific book, a really good read, basically about Jewish-Christian relations, in short, but how the relationship of Christianity and Judaism changed when the Emperor Constantine became a Christian. I think that's a very, very fine book. Yes.
I was wondering if you would say a word about Marcion, and also if you would consider 1 Clement to be a first-century witness to the text of 1 Corinthians.
Oh, wow. I feel like I'm in my doctoral exam all of a sudden. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Marcion. The short on Marcion. Marcion was probably the most important Christian thinker of the 2nd century. He was a kind of a teacher-philosopher type from Asia Minor, who took the Apostle Paul very seriously when Paul differentiated between the gospel of Christ and the law of the Jews. Paul thought that